Hey y'all, welcome to Sandy's Library. I'm Sandy, and we're back for part 2 of the Religion Wars. These are old family tales about my grandmother's people. If you need visuals, there are links posted in the description outlining both of my grandparents' family trees. So, at the end of the last video, we were trying to reason out where all the animosity came from that was going on between the Baptists and the Saints. Now, granted, when I first came across the story of religious persecution in our half-cousin's manuscript, and granted, back then, I hadn't read the entire book, but I have now, multiple times. And y'all, it says in numerous locations that no matter where they were, people didn't like or trust the Saints. Not in Arkansas, and not in Louisiana. And I gotta tell you, I do recall reading that in Louisiana, Willie felt like an outsider in the town of Eris, and that the townspeople didn't like him or the Saints. And you know, I gotta ask myself, why? Why didn't people like him, and why didn't they like the Saints? There's all this animosity that's reported in our half-cousin's manuscript, yet not a single explanation is given for any of it. I'll admit it makes me skeptical about peculiars, sorry guys. Sometimes the wrong words fall out of my mouth, even though I got the right ones in my head. But let's see if we can correct that, because it didn't. Okay, let's start over. I'll admit it makes me skeptical about the particulars of this portion of the tale, since I don't ever remember hearing about this from my grandmother or any of her siblings. And for me, if the researchers are not explaining the animosity, then there must be a reason for that too. When we leave out parts of the story, to me, it suggests that somebody is trying to hide something. And if the original researcher didn't know what the animosity stemmed from, you know, as an investigative genealogist, why didn't he or she pressure the storyteller for details? Why? How could someone researching the family not be curious about that? I still don't know if this story happened or not, but so far, all of the historical records that I've come across support the idea that this story actually could have happened. That said, I can see why Willie and Lizzie's parents would decide to keep this story under wraps. It's not very flattering. I mean, we can't drag Lizzie into that decision. She'd be dead in about 10 years. And y'all, I don't recall my grandmother or any of her siblings or any of the other names that our half-cousin has splattered throughout the story that I recognize anyway. Well, I don't ever remember any of them speaking about this. It's just weird that my grandmother's eldest sibling, Aunt Julie Bell, appears to corroborate the story, even though I've never heard her speak a word of it. You know what else is weird? What was with all that animosity for the Saints in the Beret community? And what exactly was it that made Jim Riley on the Baptist side and Jim Fuller on the Saints side come to blows? And y'all, if the brother J.R. Riley from the Mount Olive Baptist Church's minutes is one and the same as the Jim Riley from our story, well then, he's got a history of troublemaking now, don't he? And Jim Fuller? Well, it depends on which Jim Fuller we're talking about. He could have been Lizzie's brother or her uncle. Unfortunately, our half-cousin never said, but y'all know, I ain't gonna let it go that easily. So, if the Jim Fuller in the story is Lizzie's brother, which it makes sense that it would be, I mean, in the genealogical records that were compiled by people other than me, he's listed as James Abner Lion Jim Fuller. So, I mean, the only thing to conclude from that is that he was a known liar. And hey, it wasn't me that said it. Our half-cousin did. But if I'm being honest, my grandmother's accounts of her mother's brother, Jim Fuller, corroborates the genealogical notes. She told me more than once that Uncle Jim was known for his ability to spin a tall tale. And I'm here to tell you he wasn't the only one. My family has raised some great liars. So, I'm more inclined to believe that the Jim Fuller in question was Lizzie's brother, but there is a slight chance it could have been her uncle. Marion's brother, Jim, was born in 1848 and he died in 1935. The problem for me is that Lizzie's Uncle Jim would have been around 50 years old at the time of the altercation with Riley. So anyway, there's this big fight between Jim Fuller on the Saints side and Jim Riley for the Baptist. The townspeople are steaming mad at the Saints congregation over it too. Do y'all know what I want to know? What caused this fight between the two Jims? What exactly were they fighting over? Because honestly, y'all, this does not sound like the peaceful people who had offered to share their church building with another religious group that is reported in our family history. And, as the story goes, there was already some animosity between the two groups prior to the fight, and that the fight pushed the Baptists over the edge, causing them to form a secret vigilante group. But why? Why? What caused the animosity in the first place? I mean, it's not like these people were strangers. Most on either side had family on the other. And honestly, as this thing escalates, neither side's actions are very Christian-like. Not at all. It's said that Julia Wheat Williams sewed mob hoods for the Baptist vigilante group, which aided them in concealing their identities when they exacted their revenge upon the Saints. Doesn't it seem like there has to be more to this story than growing animosity and a simple fist fight between two men? If you ask me, the fist fight was probably over a woman. I mean, some of the Fuller men have been accused on more than one occasion of dalliances outside the bonds of marriage. But even if that's true, it still doesn't explain the animosity. A fistfight happened between two men, which caused a vigilante mob to form and then proceed to hound an entire group of people with the silliest of pranks. And all over this one person? I'm just not buying it. It doesn't make sense. There are details missing from this story. Details that I wish the recorder of this story had been curious enough to ask about. Nevertheless, as the story continues, it's reported that one evening, not long after the fight between Fuller and Riley, the members of the Baptist church donned their hoods, made by Julia Wheat Williams, and headed for the local church building where the RLDS group was holding services. And then the Baptists proceeded with a silly prank that's reminiscent of teenagers at summer camp. It said that the Baptist group began to bray like goats and made the sounds of various other animals, all in hopes of disrupting the saints' services. And I asked myself, what would make grown men and possibly women act this way? And y'all, I can't come up with a logical explanation for this behavior either. But nevertheless, this is what happened, and it's said that the Baptist group's childish actions reportedly enraged the saints, who commenced planning their own counterattacks. And it's also said that my grandmother's eldest sibling, Julia Bell, who would have been around 7 years old at the time of the pranks, stated that she saw her mother, Lizzie Fuller Williams, and other women sewing complete body sheets for their own mob. I guess they didn't want to cover just their heads, did they? So, from that point on, it was all-out war between the two sects. It's reported that saints even made pole axes to carry into battle against the Baptists. So it shouldn't be any surprise that the saints had to find another place to conduct their services after that. It was then that they began to meet in the home of Marion and Belle Fuller, Lizzie Fuller Williams's parents. It's said that the saints would sing an old song called The Destruction of the Goats during this time. The lyrics were said to recount these Baptist pranks. And the lyrics go something like, "Now the people of Magnolia can come to church once more, for the goats have quit their bawling round the school and church house door." The above is said to be referenced in Reflections of Ashley County, Arkansas by Y.W. Etheridge on page 91. That said, I can't find any reference to this book online, nor does a Google search turn up anything pertinent on the destruction of goats either. And I'll admit, I haven't given too much attention to the song. Whether they sang it or not is beside the point, really. The point is that the animosity between the two groups continued until it escalated into a boiling point when a Latter-day Saints preacher was invited to come to Berea to preach to the saints in Marion Fuller's home. And we're going to discuss that in the next video up. So stay tuned for part 3. Later, Gators.